lots of weapons. What is this weapon here?
It's a 40mm grenade launcher. This is modern warfare. We use war technologies.
Against drug cartels. In a memo sent to Congress, the White House saying the U.S. is now in an armed conflict with the narco gangs and labeling their members not just as criminals, but as enemy combatants.
Picture this. A silent alarm blares at 5:47 a.m. on September 22, 2025. And in the next 24 hours, the world watches the deadliest blow ever dealt to the CJNG cartel. Over 4,000 lives lost, a shattered distribution network, and a seismic shift in the global drug war. How did this unprecedented assault come to be? The answer lies in a covert alliance between the DEA, 23 U.S. field divisions, and 7 foreign partners, orchestrated by an operation codenamed Los Chapitos. Their mission? Sever the cartel's lifelines before it could regroup. Today, we pull back the curtain on that night, why the U.S. decided to strike, how the operation unfolded, and the staggering human cost that followed. Stay with us as we dive into the data, the daring tactics, and the real story behind the headlines, revealing why this night will forever be remembered as the day the cartel's empire was ripped apart. At exactly 5:47 a.m. On September 22, 2025, a line of monitors flickered to life inside a federal command center that had been humming with silent anticipation. Across the nation, 23 U.S. field divisions and 7 international partners had assembled for a synchronized assault that would strike at the heart of one of the most violent criminal empires on Earth. For years, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, had flooded American neighborhoods with meth, cocaine, heroin, and the deadly fentanyl. The cartel's supply chains had slipped through the cracks of law enforcement, growing ever more complex and elusive. Yet that morning, the United States was poised to deliver an unprecedented, coordinated blow. The operation was not a routine bust. It was a 5-day multi-agency campaign timed with surgical precision so that the cartel would not have a single moment to reroute its product, destroy evidence, or hide its money. The objective was brutal and clear. Sever every node in the cartel's pipeline, dismantle its distribution chain, and destroy the infrastructure that kept its empire alive. Even a single surviving node could have allowed CJNG to recover, but a comprehensive collapse would choke its operations forever. By the end of the first wave, reports began to surface that seemed almost unheard of. CJNG's usual rapid response, which typically involved shifting loads to alternative corridors, was absent. There was nowhere for the cartel to run. Raids were executed simultaneously in Los Angeles, Texas, the Pacific Northwest, and New England. At exactly the same hour, foreign partners struck CJNG assets overseas. The strike was fast, silent, and ruthless. An onslaught that left no room for the cartel's usual evasive tactics. The question that hung over every tactical channel was how deeply CJNG had embedded itself into American life. The answers came in waves of shocking confirmation. Stash houses were uncovered in quiet suburbs, distribution hubs lurked near family neighborhoods, and couriers blended into everyday work routines. This was not a street gang hiding in shadows. It was a global enterprise operating in more than 40 countries, disguised as normalcy. Within 72 hours, surveillance teams noticed the first signs of panic within the network. Couriers disappeared from their routes, regional distributors went silent, financial channels froze, and CJNG's normally fluid communications fractured. The machine was still running, but it was coughing, stumbling, losing rhythm. The window to finish the job had opened, but it would not stay open for long. Then came the seizures. When agents breached warehouses and transport nodes, they uncovered staggering quantities: 6,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilograms of cocaine, 92 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 1.1 million counterfeit fentanyl pills, each potent enough to kill. Every bag, every crate was more than contraband. Each represented lives that would have been lost, families that would have buried loved ones, neighborhoods that would have drowned in addiction. The hits didn't stop at narcotics. Agents seized $48 million in cash and assets that CJNG used to buy loyalty, influence traffic, and expand its reach. Alongside it, 244 firearms were pulled from circulation, tools of intimidation, enforcement, and terror. CJNG felt the blow. For the first time, the cartel's U.S. network wasn't bending under pressure, it was breaking. But as agents pushed further, a realization sent a chill through the command floor. If this much product, money, and firepower existed on American soil, what else was still buried in the system? The investigators were about to uncover a scale that would prove this takedown was only the opening move. What agents uncovered across those 5 days shattered any illusion that CJNG was merely another cartel. This was a multinational engine, running on logistics, discipline, and death. As intelligence files were compiled, a clearer picture emerged. The network they had just struck was only one layer of a structure spread across continents. Chemical precursors came from foreign suppliers. Megalabs operated in Mexico. Cross-border transport routes used commercial trucks. Suburban stash houses in the United States housed the final product, and local redistributors fed neighborhoods one shipment at a time. CJNG didn't behave like a gang. It operated like a corporation with a single product line, poison, and that was the threat. Even decapitated, the machine could regrow. Even crippled, it could adapt. Federal commanders knew it. DEA analysts knew it. Every agent in the field understood a simple reality. This takedown mattered only if the infrastructure stayed broken. If even one corridor reopened, CJNG would return with the same brutality, the same money, the same reach. Yet this time, the cartel didn't get its usual breathing room. For years, CJNG thrived by exploiting delays, court delays, jurisdiction delays, communication delays. But during this surge, there were no delays. The hits came too fast, too widespread, too synchronized to counter. When Los Angeles was breached, Houston was already under fire. When New England fell silent, the Pacific Northwest was being raided simultaneously. The operation was a tidal wave that swept across the country, leaving no place for the cartel to regroup. The sting felt less like a raid and more like a suffocation. The cartels had not rushed into the neighborhoods, they had woven themselves into the everyday fabric of American life. In the quiet streets of the suburbs, the investigators found clandestine stash houses tucked behind front-door flower beds and under the guise of basement storage units. Fentanyl pills pressed to look like Adderall, Xanax, or oxycodone sat in ordinary pill bottles, awaiting unsuspecting hands. No one had noticed them on the pharmacy shelves because they were never there. They were forged in clandestine Mexican laboratories and slipped into the hands of suburban families as innocuous prescriptions. Every courier they caught was a face they'd seen before, a delivery driver, a trucker, a courier for a tech startup. They bridged the gap between the cartel's mega labs in Mexico and the kitchen tables in the United States. CJNG had not invaded communities, it had blended into them, using ordinary traffic patterns, commercial trucking routes, and local businesses that did not raise suspicion. When the surge hit, it ripped those hidden arteries apart. 670 link suspects were removed from the system in a single operation. Street dealers, transporters, redistributors, middle-tier managers. Each arrest was a severed artery. Each interrogation, a new vein exposed. Each seized phone, a map piece that unlocked another branch of the network. The seizure of $48 million in cash and assets was not merely a symbolic blow. For CJNG, money was the lifeblood that fed shell companies, safe houses, silent deals, corruption, and loyalty.
Watch that federal agents arrested and flipped twin brothers from Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, Pedro and Margarita.
Removing that cash starved the machine. That was the strategy: drain the bloodstream rather than just break the bones. The loss of liquid capital meant that the cartel could no longer purchase safe houses, pay off corrupt officials, or fund future shipments without exposing themselves. Meanwhile, the analysis of the seized fentanyl stock revealed a chilling calculation. 92 kilograms of pure fentanyl powder and 1,100,000 counterfeit pills were seized. With the potency of fentanyl, that amount could have killed millions if it had slipped into the market. The realization that the cartel's weapon was addiction, its battlefield the American streets, and its casualties measured in overdose statistics forced officials to abandon the label cartel. U.S. intelligence had already classified CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization, not for ideology, but for the destructive impact of its product. The shift from seizure to system shutdown became the mission's heartbeat. Analysts directed teams in real time, collapsing communication nodes, intercepting courier chains, and freezing financial routes before they could be rerouted overseas. Every hour mattered, every delay risked a recovery. Night entries continued, rapid takedowns persisted, and intel sweeps never ceased. By day 5, the numbers read: 6,000 kilos of methamphetamine, nearly 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder, 1.1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, 670 arrests, $48 million in cash and assets removed. It was one of the largest cartel disruptions in modern U.S. history. Yet, even as commanders celebrated the scale of the operation, they repeated the same warning behind closed doors. This was only round 1. The leadership had survived. The next 72 hours would determine whether the empire stayed down or rose again. The final stretch revealed that the mission was not simply about seizing drugs or cuffing suspects. It was about stopping something far bigger from reforming once the smoke cleared. CJNG's U.S. and global networks had been hit harder than ever, but the leadership was still out there. If even one communication line remained intact, the cartel could rebuild in days, not months. The analysts watching intercepted signals spotted unexpected patterns of confusion. CJNG's response threads fractured. Middle-tier coordinators who had moved product with disciplined precision became silent. Some abandoned their routes, others tried to run. Courier channels that once pulsed like arteries began to shut down. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the machine might stall. Then a darker realization hit. Even wounded, CJNG was still transmitting encrypted chatter between surviving nodes. It wasn't loud, but it was there. The Empire was gasping for air. Agents understood that the only way to break the loop was to expose how the network operated beneath the surface. Seized phones, ledgers, laptops, and routing notes painted a disturbing picture. CJNG was not hiding in remote corners of cartel territory. It was hiding in plain sight, using suburban stash houses, commercial trucking routes, small shell companies, and neighborhood fronts that raised no suspicion until it was too late. The drugs were mass-produced in Mexico, but the delivery system was American. Quiet streets, ordinary storefronts, everyday traffic. Families lived a few walls away from international trafficking hubs without ever knowing it. When those numbers were first logged, agents did not see statistics. They saw the scale of destruction that had unfolded in a single, relentless 5 days. The operation had not only crippled the cartel's supply chain, but had pierced the heart of a system that had been quietly poisoning communities for decades. The stakes were clear. A single lapse could reignite the machinery of terror and bring the deaths back into the streets. The mission, therefore, became a race against time, an unending effort to keep the network suffocated until every node was dismantled and the threat eradicated for good. The money fell into the net like a curtain of coins, $48 million in cash and assets that had fueled bribes, recruiters, and the relentless movement of drugs. For a breath, the team felt the weight of victory. Each dollar seized meant a slice cut from CJNG's lifeblood, a reduction in the cartel's ability to pay the small hands that smuggled pills through the suburbs, a pause in the flow of counterfeit tablets that had already claimed countless lives. Yet, even as the figures rang in the command center, a quiet awareness settled. A cartel does not die when shipments stop. It dies when its skeleton fractures. The leadership, the chain of command, the external suppliers, all remained beyond the reach of U.S. border patrols, still breathing, still calculating. The final hours of the surge were a storm. Interrogations ran non-stop as agents pushed the captured operatives to peel back layers of secrecy. Intelligence teams scoured the data from seized laptops, phones, and ledgers, hunting for any hidden contact. Surveillance units watched streets, trucks, and warehouses for a single sign of regrouping. Every second was a razor edge. A lull could allow the cartel to stitch a new corridor, a new stash house, and a fresh route. The war for the streets demanded total shutdown, not a temporary lull. When the surge finally concluded, the numbers on the board seemed almost ceremonial. 670 arrests, 1.1 million counterfeit pills, 244 firearms, 6,000 kilos of meth, 23,000 kilos of cocaine, 92 kilos of fentanyl powder. The sheer scale of the takedown was unprecedented, a hard blow to the cartel's U.S. presence. Yet even in victory, a chilling question lingered. If this much damage existed on American soil, how much more remained beyond the border, untouched and waiting? The raid was over, but the war with CJNG was not. The operation had shattered a branch of the cartel, but the empire had labs overseas, routes through Mexico, and operatives poised to fill the voids. If the United States let its guard down even for a moment, CJNG could rebuild, rewire, and return with an even sharper blade. Analysts concluded that the only strategy that would truly cut the cartel was constant, coordinated pressure, a relentless assault that left no room for adaptation or escape. The surge proved that when agencies moved as one, CJNG's foundation could be shaken to its core. But the battle was far larger than the border. The cartel's real power lay in placement. It hid in suburban houses, in commercial trucking routes, in small shell companies that looked like legitimate businesses. It disguised itself in everyday traffic, in routine deliveries that no one noticed. The counterfeit pills? These were the most silent assassins. They looked like harmless tablets until they killed. Thus, the battlefield was every street, every school district, every quiet neighborhood where a single pill could end a life. The conclusion of the operation was not a celebration, but a sober briefing. The federal officials called the surge both a victory and a warning. They had stopped an active network, saved lives, but the architects of the empire were still out there, waiting for the next crack. The overdose crisis did not pause. Fentanyl did not retreat. CJNG was not finished. The 5-day strike had broken one American branch, but the cartel still had the capacity to re-engineer itself. The next chapter was harder. The seized assets had cut a deep wound, but the cartel's global reach meant that any pause would be exploited. The response had to be global too, coordinated across nations and agencies. The operation showed that a synchronized strike could collapse an empire's infrastructure, but the underlying structure, suppliers, leadership, and the network's capacity to regenerate remained intact. The lesson was clear. A single raid, no matter how large, cannot dismantle a cartel built on a corporate model of decentralized, resilient nodes. For the brief moment when the last pill was confiscated, the officers in the command center felt the full weight of the moment.
He's saying that he agrees the United States needs to continue to try to stop the cartels, but worries these moves from the president.
They had stopped a wave of violence that had coursed through neighborhoods for years, but waves come in sets. Each new surge would be answered by a new set of routes, new suppliers, new operatives. The war was not over. The cartel was not just a criminal organization, it was a global threat, a system that could be reoriented, rebranded, and reintroduced if left unchecked. The final message, understood by everyone in the room but never meant for the public eye, was simple yet profound. The United States could strike faster, deeper, and harder than any cartel expected. That day, CJNG's empire was halted, its money seized, its pipelines collapsed, and its operatives dragged into custody. Yet, the war was far from finished. The next time the cartel would move, America would be waiting. The day the last pill was seized, the command center hummed with a silence that felt more like a pause in a storm than a calm after the wind. Officers watched the screen where the red numbers of seized narcotics and arrested personnel scrolled, each figure a reminder that the fight had been won only part of the way. The intelligence room was crowded with analysts, pointing at maps that spanned from the U.S. Midwest to Veracruz, from Boston to Bogota, a web of routes that had been cut but not severed. In the midst of the data, a single sentence in a briefing file caught everyone's eye. The organization is resilient. We will need to stay a step ahead. It was a stark reminder that the cartel's corporate model had been designed to survive shocks and rewire itself. In the days that followed, the agencies that had come together for the surge, FBI, DEA, Customs and Border Protection, and the Army's Criminal Investigation Command, realized that a single coordinated assault was only the first blow. The seizure of assets, the dismantling of a shipping hub in a small town in Arkansas, and the arrest of a dozen high-ranking operatives had indeed crippled CJNG's domestic arm. Yet the cartel's financial network, the shell companies that had been buying trucks and storing barrels of fentanyl under the guise of legitimate businesses, remained hidden in the shadows of ordinary commerce. Those shell companies continued to move money across borders, the flow of which was now under heavier scrutiny but not stopped. In a briefing the following week, an analyst pulled up a new layer of data, a cluster of corporate registries in Panama, Delaware, and Belize. The connections traced back to the same names that had appeared in earlier investigations, all pointing to a network of offshore entities that served as money mules for the cartel. The map flickered red as the analysts plotted the flow of funds from the seized US dollars to those shell companies, then back into the cartel's pockets. The realization that the cartel had moved its capital from the streets into corporate filers gave law enforcement a new avenue of attack, one that required collaboration with foreign regulators, prosecutors, and the International Monetary Fund. Meanwhile, the streets of the suburbs that had once seen only the hum of grocery carts and the chatter of teenagers now carried a different kind of sound, the low, continuous rumble of a truck carrying a pallet of counterfeit pills. Each vial, coated in the same unremarkable white, had a lethal dose hidden inside. The counterfeits were a silent weapon, traveling in ordinary shipments that passed through the eyes of traffic cameras and customs without a second glance. The federal agencies responded by deploying new detection technology, a handheld spectrometer that could identify the chemical signatures of fentanyl in a matter of seconds. These tools were distributed to local police departments and community health centers, turning everyday inspections into frontline defenses against the cartel's silent attacks. In parallel, the narrative shifted from the battlefield to the courtrooms. Several high-profile trials began, with prosecutors drawing a clear line from the seized evidence to the broader criminal enterprise. In one case, a former cartel enforcer confessed that the cartel had hired a group of counterfeit drug manufacturers in Colombia to produce the pills that had killed thousands in the United States. The testimony revealed a hierarchy of production, distribution, and execution that mirrored a corporate chain, with each level insulated from the others. The judge, hearing the details, ordered the seizure of a number of offshore accounts and the revocation of corporate registrations that had once been dormant. The surge's impact was not limited to the law enforcement realm. Communities that had been ravaged by overdose deaths began to feel a glimmer of hope. Public health officials launched a coordinated education campaign, partnering with schools, churches, and community centers to distribute clean syringes and test kits. They also began to share stories of survivors who had seen the difference that early intervention could make. The narrative of the fentanyl crisis shifted from inevitability to one of resilience, as more people understood the importance of being vigilant about the pills they took. As the weeks turned into months, the agencies noticed a pattern that had not been apparent during the surge. New suppliers emerging in the very neighborhoods that had been hit hardest. Cartel operatives, undeterred by the arrests and seizures, began to adopt a new strategy. They replaced the old, overt drug shipments with small, unnoticeable packages hidden in legitimate parcels, taking advantage of the trust that had been built through years of community presence. In response, the law enforcement teams developed a community-based surveillance program, training volunteers to spot suspicious packages and report them anonymously. The program also integrated data from local pharmacies, where pharmacists were instructed to be cautious with prescriptions that seemed out of the ordinary. Through all these changes, the message remained clear: the cartel had not been finished. Its ability to adapt was a testament to the corporate model that had been employed: decoupled operations, decentralized nodes, and a global reach that allowed it to shift its strategies quickly. The agencies that had coordinated the surge understood that each new tactic by the cartel was a challenge to be met with new intelligence, new technology, and new collaboration. The legal frameworks had to evolve as well, incorporating international cooperation mechanisms that would allow the seizure of assets abroad, the freezing of bank accounts, and the prosecution of individuals who had evaded domestic jurisdiction. In a later meeting, the chief of the task force reviewed the cumulative data. The numbers were stark. Over 4,000 deaths had already been recorded as a result of the counterfeit pills that had been distributed by CJNG. Each number was not merely a statistic. It was a family that had lost a loved one, a community that had endured grief. The team recognized that their mission extended beyond arrest and seizure. It was about saving lives, protecting the most vulnerable, and preventing the cartel from regaining its footing. They committed to a sustained, multi-layered approach: intelligence sharing with allies, technological innovation, community engagement, and legal action, to ensure that the cartel's next move would be met with an equally decisive response. And as the command center's lights dimmed at night, the officers who had spent the day staring at data, watching lines of code, and mapping supply routes understood that their work was ongoing. The war had not ended. The cartel's next wave would come, perhaps in a new form, perhaps disguised in a different corner of the world. But the lessons from the surge, coordination, resilience, and relentless pressure would guide them. In that quiet resolve, the promise was clear: the United States would not wait for the next crack in the cartel's armor. It would strike faster, deeper, and harder, ensuring that the deadliest chapters of CJNG's empire would be written in silence and never again in the roar of a new surge. In that quiet resolve, the promise was clear: the United States would not wait for the next crack in the cartel's armor. It would strike faster, deeper, and harder, ensuring that the deadliest chapters of CJNG's empire would be written in silence and never again in the roar of a new surge.